In a hurried society, there are people who appear every day, yet no one bothers to look at them for more than a second, even though they might be the flesh and blood of someone you're nodding to. New York City, 6:12 a.m. A fine drizzle fell steadily over the streets just waking up. The air was cold and bleak, making people walk faster and keep their eyes on the ground. On 55th Avenue, right in front of the Parker Group headquarters, the largest multinational corporation in America, a small figure trudged along wearily. An elderly black woman in a worn-out coat, hair disheveled and eyes cloudy, stood fixated on the modern glass facade of the building. Her lips whispered a name, repeating it like a chant. Eli, Eli, are you here? A sharp wind swept by, carrying with it a chill. Her old baseball cap was blown away. She staggered as her bare feet, exposed through shoes with broken soles, were freezing. A man stepping out of a luxury Tesla glanced at her and turned away. A blonde woman in a suit pulled her collar up and frowned, muttering, "Damn it, another homeless? They're everywhere." A voice shouted, "Hey, you there? This is a private area, no loitering." Jake, a tall white security guard with a hoarse voice, stepped out of the guard post. He walked straight toward the old woman with a guarded expression, as if she were a biohazard. "Move along! This isn't a charity shelter." The old woman looked up, her voice weak. I'm just looking for Eli, my grandson." Jake smirked and shrugged. "Eli, huh? There are hundreds of people named that here. But trust me, your grandson definitely doesn't work here." She remained where she was, shivering as the rain soaked through her coat. Jake, growing impatient, gave her a light push. "I told you, get out of here." But the push was enough to make her slip and fall onto the cold pavement. A group of office workers arriving for the morning shift saw her fall, but only glanced and ignored her. A sales employee named Connor whistled. "Another crazy old lady, probably escaped from a facility." A colleague named Amanda pursed her lips and muttered, "A homeless black woman. Typical." No one came to help. The old woman struggled to get up, her head bumping lightly against the wall. The rain lashed her face like a whip. She didn't cry, but her lips trembled, cracked from the cold and hunger. "Eli, my grandson. I've been looking for you for so long." A glass door behind her opened. A young woman stepped out, holding a notebook and a cup of coffee. She stopped when she saw the old woman lying motionless on the sidewalk, clothes soaked, a faint trace of blood on her forehead. Unlike the others, she didn't look away. She ran over, knelt down, and shielded the old woman with her umbrella. "Oh my God, ma'am, are you all right?" The name tag on her chest gleamed silver in the rain. Sarah Miller, HR assistant. The rain kept falling. Droplets landed on the stone pavement, mixing with the thin trace of blood where the old woman had fallen. Among the indifferent crowd, Sarah Miller was the only one who stopped. She was around 27 years old, her brown hair neatly tied back, her face bright and sincere, with worried eyes as she knelt beside the elderly woman. "Ma'am, can you hear me? You've taken a fall." The old woman blinked slowly, her wrinkled face scrunched from the cold. But in her cloudy eyes there was a spark, as if, for the first time in many days, someone saw her as a human being. "Sarah," the young woman said softly, her hands trembling as she took off her scarf and wrapped it gently around the old woman's neck. Another security guard, Troy, saw Sarah kneeling beside the woman and quickly approached. "Sarah, what are you doing? This person has been causing a disturbance all morning. Don't get involved." Sarah looked straight at Troy, her eyes resolute. "I see an elderly person who fell in the rain and is bleeding from the head. I can't just stand and watch." Troy frowned, glanced at the old woman and scoffed. "These homeless people are good at pretending." "She didn't really fall. Be careful, she might bite." "She's still a person," Sarah replied quietly but firmly. She took out her phone and called internal medical services. About 30 minutes later, the old woman was brought to the staff rest area. Sarah sat beside her, gently wiping her face with a warm towel and offering her some bread and hot tea. "What's your name?" Sarah asked softly. The woman smiled faintly, her eyes seeming to cut through the fog of memory. "My name is Margaret, but my grandson called me Grammy. He made that up because he couldn't say grandma when he was little." Sarah smiled, her gaze shifting from sympathy to warmth. "Your grandson? Is his name Eli?" Margaret blinked. "Yes, Eli. Eli Parker. He works in this building. Do you know him? He's a white boy, but he is the child of my heart." Sarah paused. Eli Parker. The name was not unfamiliar. He was the youngest and richest CEO in America, running Parker Group since he was 33. People said he had no family, no past, only ambition. Sarah was skeptical. "You said Eli is your grandson? But Iman, he's white, isn't he?" Margaret smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was a painful one, mocking the idea of racial separation. "People use skin color to deny kinship, but I raised him with these hands, with my last coins, with the loneliness of a woman who had no biological children, but had love." Sarah swallowed. She felt something deeply real in that voice. This old woman wasn't lying. Margaret fumbled through the pockets of her old coat and took out a small, worn photo. Sarah accepted it. A white boy about 6 years old was hugging the neck of a smiling black woman. On the back of the photo was written, "To Grammy, my only family. Love, Eli, Christmas 1999. Sarah froze. She immediately stepped into the hallway, pulled out her phone, and called the executive assistant's office. "My name is Sarah Miller. I think I may have found Mr. Eli Parker's grandmother." There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. Then a man's voice answered coldly, "CEO Parker has no grandmother." Sarah looked through the fog glass at Margaret, who was still holding the old photo to her chest. She replied slowly, "Maybe he's forgotten her, but she's never forgotten him, not even for a single day." 87th floor, CEO office, 7:13 a.m. In a glass-walled office with a panoramic view of New York City, Eli Parker, 38 years old, stood in silence by the window, gazing down at the streams of traffic that looked like ants. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, a Richard Mille watch worth over $1 million on his wrist, but his eyes betrayed an unmistakable emptiness. "The Q1 report doesn't look good," his assistant said cautiously behind him. Eli didn't turn around. He replied curtly, "I don't care." The CEO admired across America, the man who had transformed Parker Group from a small construction firm into a global fintech empire, always kept his distance from everyone. No one knew who his parents were. Not a single article had uncovered the origin of Eli Parker's family. Because he had buried his past deeply, his personal assistant Daniel entered, his face unsettled. "An HR staff member said she found a woman who claims to be your grandmother." Eli frowned. He turned, his eyes sharp with a mix of suspicion and irritation. "Grandmother? I don't have a grandmother." Daniel nodded. "Yes, but she says her name is Margaret, and she has a photo signed by you from 1999. The name Margaret was like a sonic bullet piercing Eli's brain. He stood frozen. Then, as if by instinct, he said, "Bring the photo here." Eli's hand trembled slightly as he held the old picture. In the frame was a young white boy with wide eyes hugging a smiling black woman. On the back was his own handwriting, "To Grammy, my only family. Love, Eli. Christmas 1999. Eli's vision blurred. A snowy night in 1994. A 6-year-old boy abandoned at a gas station on the outskirts of Atlanta. No papers, no name. Nothing but a torn jacket. An older black woman, Margaret, who worked the night janitor shift nearby, found the shivering boy in a public restroom. "What's your name?" "I don't know." "Is anyone with you?" "There's no one left." And so she took the boy home, fed him, gave him a name, Eli, which means light. He grew up in a poor neighborhood where Margaret washed clothes, cleaned houses, did every odd job to send Eli to school. But when Eli began to excel, to stand out in school, people started questioning. "Adopted kid, are you sure that white boy's not your employer's son?" Skin color became an invisible burden. At 18, Eli earned a full scholarship to a prestigious university, but the admissions board required family information for verification. Eli hesitated, then left the guardian's name field blank. He didn't list Margaret. He chose silence out of fear of public judgment, of a career setback if people found out he was a white kid raised by a black janitor. From then on, he cut all contact. No letters, no calls. And he climbed to the top, leaving Margaret behind like a silent, dead memory. Eli gripped the photo tightly, eyes burning, not with anger, but with shame, panic, and fear. "She's still alive?" Daniel nodded. "She's in the medical unit. A woman named Sarah Miller brought her in. She fell outside the lobby." Eli bit his lip. It wasn't the cold. It was a truth more painful than any chill. The woman who held him through his entire childhood had just been shoved to the ground and called trash in front of the building that bore his name. He took a deep breath, his voice rough. "Get the car ready. I want to see her. Right now." Daniel nodded, glancing back as he walked out, for the first time seeing tears in the CEO's eyes. Eli Parker stood in the elevator. As the doors closed, the outside world, the meetings, reports, strategies, gradually faded away. He pressed number 5, the internal medical floor. One hand rested on his chest, where his heart was pounding harder than usual. It wasn't from financial pressure, it was fear. The fear of facing the one person who had loved him unconditionally. Grammy! That name echoed from the deepest corner of his past. The elevator door opened. Sarah was sitting next to the hospital bed. She immediately stood up and nodded slightly. "She's awake now, but her memory comes and goes." Eli stepped in. Seeing the elderly woman with silver hair, wrinkled skin, and a frail body lying on the bed, no one would have guessed she once carried the weight of the world on her shoulders to raise a child who wasn't even hers by blood. Margaret opened her eyes. She looked at him. Her eyes were dim, but when they met Eli's, they shimmered strangely. "Eli, my Eli." Eli froze. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. "You're still so pale, still skinny, still not sleeping enough?" She smiled. Most of her teeth were gone, but her voice was still as warm as it had always been. Eli knelt beside the bed, resting his forehead in her palm like a child. "Grammy, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Margaret stroked his hair. "I know. You didn't stay away because you forgot. It's because this world has no place for a CEO raised by a black cleaning lady." Eli said nothing. "But I don't blame you. I just feared if I died without seeing you one more time, I'd take that regret to the grave." Atlanta, 2002. Eli was 18, the night before flying to New York for college. Margaret packed him some bread, a letter, and a small wooden cross. "Remember to wear this. Don't let anyone take away your faith. Grammy, I'll be really busy." "Busy or not, you still have to live with kindness." Eli didn't look back. He walked away and never returned. He recalled his media interviews. "I grew up in an orphanage. I have no family, no ties. Self-made, self-driven. All lies." He had erased a woman from his life simply because she didn't fit the image of a modern CEO. Eli clutched her hand, his voice choked. "Why? Did you keep looking for me?" Margaret looked at him as if he were still the 6-year-old boy she once found. "Because I never abandoned you, no matter what the world did." Sarah stood outside the room, witnessing it all. Her hands clenched tightly. In her mind echoed all the corporate ethics training, the grand speeches on compassion, the flashy slogans. All of it now felt hollow when even the CEO who symbolized the American dream had once abandoned the very person who gave him everything just because of the color of her skin. Eli stood up. He looked at Sarah and said quietly, "I want all the security footage from this morning. Every recording. I'm going to show this entire company who really needs to relearn how to be human." 8 a.m., executive meeting room. 89th floor, Parker Group. The 89th floor, typically reserved for high-stakes strategy meetings worth millions, was packed that morning. Over 200 senior staff members were present, C-suite executives, regional managers, department heads, and executive assistants. There was no detailed agenda. Only one line in the email summons: be present on time. No absences for any reason. The atmosphere was stifling and tense. People sipped coffee in silence, casting uncertain glances at each other. At the front table, Sarah Miller sat quietly. No one paid attention to her, the anonymous HR assistant who had suddenly been listed under mandatory attendees. The door opened. Eli Parker walked in. No Armani suit, no Tom Ford tie. He wore a plain white shirt, gray slacks, open collar, sleeves lightly rolled. His face was pale and solemn, not that of a man about to discuss financials. Everyone stood instinctively, a conditioned response. "Sit down." Eli's voice was low, brief, without expression. A large LED screen lit up. Not spreadsheets, not growth strategies, but footage from the security cameras that morning, right outside Parker Tower. The room gasped as the video played, a frail black woman, shivering in the cold rain, slowly approaching the glass doors. The security guard's voice came through the intercom. "Get out of here, old lady." The footage showed her being pushed to the stone pavement, blood seeping from her forehead. The entire room held its breath. Some exchanged glances, some swallowed hard. Sarah kept her head down. Eli stared at the screen without blinking. The video ended. No music, no narration, just the raw truth. Eli stepped into the center of the room. He didn't stand at the CEO podium, but among the people, eye level, not above them. He began to speak, his voice rough. "I know what all of you are thinking. What is this? Why are we watching a video of some homeless woman loitering around?" He looked up directly into the crowd. "Let me tell you, that woman is my grandmother, the one who raised me after I was abandoned at age 6, the one who kept me alive, with the thin hands of a janitor." The room fell utterly silent. "I'm white. She's black. We have no blood relation. But when I was hungry, she fed me. When I cried from being bullied, she was the first to shield me. But when I started succeeding, I chose to forget her." He paused, his voice cracked. "Because I thought carrying along a poor black grandmother who cleaned toilets would be a burden to the image of a future CEO." Eli exhaled sharply. A woman in the middle row was tearing up. "And this morning, right in front of the company I built, someone shoved her to the ground, called her trash, a beggar. No one bothered to ask her name. No one knew she once sold her own blood so I could go to college." Eli's voice rose, echoing across the room. He pulled a small wooden cross from his pocket, old and scuffed at the edges. "She wore this for 30 years, and I hid it for 20 in a drawer so no one would know where I came from." His voice now steadied, cold as ice. "Jake, the guard from this morning is terminated immediately. No notice needed. Connor, the one who filmed and added a racist caption, suspended for 2 weeks, must write an apology letter to Margaret and read it aloud to the entire company. All staff from HR and security are now required to undergo the Humanity Culture program developed by Global Equity. Anyone who refuses may resign today." No one dared to breathe too loudly. Eli turned to Sarah, and Sarah Miller, the only person who knelt in the rain to shield my grandmother, will now temporarily serve as head of ethical culture development, reporting directly to me, effective immediately. The room was stunned. If a company can earn billions but allows its employees to shove down an elderly woman with nowhere to go, then that company does not deserve to exist, no matter how high the profit. He stopped, then declared clearly, "Culture is not a PR campaign. Kindness is not a KPI. It is the choice to be human, even when no one is watching." Eli walked out of the meeting room. No applause followed, only heavy silence, soaked in shame and reflection. Sarah quietly followed behind. On the floor below in the medical room, Margaret sat by the window, eyes watching the falling raindrops. She hadn't heard the meeting, but with a strange intuition, she knew her grandson had just done the right thing. Medical room, 5th floor, late afternoon. The rain had stopped. The first sunlight of the day streamed through the glass window, casting a soft golden glow on the floor. Margaret sat in a leather chair, wrapped in a warm blanket. Her frail hands gently touched the old photograph, the one where a white boy hugged the neck of a smiling black woman. The door opened. Eli walked in silently. He knelt down. No longer a CEO, no longer powerful, just a grandson who had once gone too far away. He held her hand and rested his forehead upon it. I used to think, if people found out I was raised by a black cleaning lady, they wouldn't accept me. I was afraid of pity, afraid of being called an outsider, afraid of being mentioned in headlines. He took a deep breath, his voice breaking. But I forgot. You were never afraid when you held a sickly white child in your arms. You were never afraid of being poor, never afraid of prejudice, just so I could live. Margaret squeezed Eli's hand, trembling. I don't need your money, Eli. I just need to know. You haven't forgotten me. Eli's tears fell onto her hand like rain. I did forget, but now I want to remember. I want to tell the whole world that I am the grandson of Margaret Johnson, the strongest woman I've ever known. Eli handed her a small box. Inside was the old wooden cross, now polished and framed in glass, engraved with the words, "For Grammy, the light that raised me from darkness." Margaret raised her hand to her mouth, shaking with emotion. That cross had once been her last hope on nights when she had nothing but prayers. Eli looked at her, then turned to Sarah, who stood at the door, and said, I want to create a fund named after her. The Margaret Fund, to support single mothers, the homeless, and abandoned children. This fund won't just hand out money, it will help them find jobs, homes, and opportunities. Sarah nodded, her eyes welling with tears. I want every child who has ever been thrown away to have a Grammy of their own. That evening, for the first time in nearly 2 decades, Eli had dinner with Margaret. Not at a 5-star restaurant, not with $1,000 wine, just chicken soup and toasted bread, the meal she used to make for him in the winter. In a personal journal Sarah found later, Margaret once wrote, I don't need Eli to succeed. I only need him not to lose his humanity, so that he won't become someone who has everything but is left with nothing. Now, Eli Parker, the man once known as a cold-blooded CEO, a heartless financial machine, had relearned the meaning of being human from an old woman whom society once called invisible. 7 days later, a peaceful morning with no rain, no noise. Margaret Johnson, the elderly woman once seen as homeless and who had been pushed to the ground in front of the company that bore her grandson's name, passed away in her sleep at the age of 83. She left quietly without pain on a clean white bed in a special room Eli had arranged for her. There were old photos of the two of them. There was the wooden cross by her pillow, and there was a handwritten letter that Eli had placed there in advance. Thank you for never abandoning me, even when I had abandoned you. At the Manhattan funeral home, hundreds of Parker Group employees attended. The press was present. Media live-streamed the event, not because she was the CEO's grandmother, but because a speech that had shaken social media had awakened something across America. If my grandmother had died being ignored on the street, then the fault would not lie with me alone, but with all of us, everyone who ever turned away from the suffering of others. Eli Parker, National Press Conference, Twitter, CNN, Bloomberg, Fox News. Every outlet spread the story. The woman thrown out of Parker HQ turns out to be the CEO's guardian, the bow that shook Wall Street. Homeless grandmother teaches an entire corporate culture a lesson. On social media, there were millions of shares, but more profoundly, a wave of introspection rose. I once ignored an old man asking for water. I once laughed at a homeless person reading a book. Now I don't see them as invisible anymore. The funeral had no expensive flowers, no limousines, no classical music. Just a small sign with a line written by Eli himself. She didn't have a bank account. She didn't own a house, but she left me a world that money could never buy. The Margaret Fund was established with an initial $50 million contributed by Eli and the community. Each year, it helps over 3,000 homeless individuals reintegrate into society, and more than 1,000 abandoned children find shelter and education. Parker Group became the first company in the United States to mandate empathy and compassion training for all staff, including the CEO. Sarah Miller became Director of Global Kindness Culture Programs, leading change across more than 14 international branches. Eli sat alone in his grandmother's small room, sunlight pouring through the glass window. He looked at the old photo, the boy who once hugged the neck of a smiling black woman. He smiled not the smile of a CEO hitting targets, but the smile of a grandson who had found his way back to himself. Grammy, I promise I'll never let anyone feel invisible the way you once did. From now on, I'll remember, and I'll remind others to remember too. She was once a homeless old woman, and yet an entire billion-dollar empire knelt in apology before her. And from that moment on, they began to relearn how to be human. When you stand at the peak of success, who will you think of first? The one who taught you how to speak, or the one who taught you how to be a person? Who do you respect most? Leave us a comment and let us know.